Best transfer class in each power conference. Our SEC pick is gonna surprise you.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, happy Monday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your host, that's Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Shade. You're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. Andy, it's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks so much for making us your first listener watch to kick off your week the right way. Want to remind you, you can catch every single episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Special shout out to all the everydayers who are here with us and all the great members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord as well. If you're not part of it, you're missing out. Andy, it is June 16th. So officially, we know those who are in the NBA draft now. Doesn't really affect anybody from college because that deadline was a while ago. But, you know, for those who care, I guess we do know who could come to college, at least out of that. Where we're headed on the show today, folks, is we're going to talk about the best transfer portal haul for each of the 5 power conferences, plus our choice for the top class outside that Power 5 conference structure. Because, Andy, at this point, portal classes are mostly set. We're down to the dregs of the transfer portal barrel. So anybody else that commits won't really move the needle all that much. Going to be interesting as we have this conversation because it's like, what wins out? Volume or quality? Volume and quality? That's definitely a winner. And Andy, I think one thing we need to make clear right out of the gate is that it's not based on like incoming and outgoing, right? Yeah. It's just about the incoming class. So if you lost a lot, like we're not factoring that in to this conversation. Andy, anything else we need to say to set it up?
No, I think that's a quality explanation. Well done.
Look at me just kicking off the week with some quality context setting. So Andy, we got these 5 conferences and one outside the power conference structure to start with. We're going to start with the SEC though, because boy, have they been doing work in the transfer portal for the past several years. Andy, who is our pick for the SEC?
Yeah, we have a under consideration note in our notes, and we have almost every SEC team listed as under consideration because there were so many great transfer portal classes. But after a fair amount of deliberation, we're actually going with a team that I think might surprise some folks, although we have talked about them a couple of times already on the show as being kind of big winners this offseason. And that's Texas A&M. That is Bucky McMillan and the Aggies. I love this class coming in, and you mentioned the volume versus quality, and I think that this class is a really good example of being mostly both. They have 10 players coming in, and certainly that's a lot of volume, and it's not like every one of these 10 players is a super high quality, like starting caliber player necessarily. But I look at this class and I see 4 players that I think are very likely going to start for what I expect to be a pretty good Texas A&M team. I think it starts at the top with Pop Isaacs, who they got kind of this is why we listed them as a NBA withdrawal deadline winner, even though Pop Isaacs did not withdraw from the deadline. Milos Uzan did. He went back to Houston. Pop Isaacs said no thanks to Houston and came to Texas A&M. They also get Mackenzie Mgbako from Indiana. I really like him, and I think in a new setting, things could go really, really well for Mgbako in his 3rd year of college hoops. Fed comes over from Texas Tech, Rylan Griffin from Kansas. I think those 4 guys probably start if everything goes well for Bucky McMillan and A&M. And then they got a few other kind of depth pieces that I think are going to be very good for them. Jakari Lane is a guy I like a lot. Marcus Hill from NC State I like a lot. Jamie Vinson from Texas has some upside. Like, this is a really good quality class with a lot of depth and a lot of high-end talent. And I recognize that there are people out there who are either Kentucky fans or Florida fans or Auburn fans. There are probably other teams, but those are kind of the ones that I think had a strong, compelling case for this award here. And to me, I just like the combination of volume and quality that A&M has coming in. And again, like, they're relying on their transfer portal class more than Kentucky, who's got some great freshmen coming in and some great returners, and Florida, who's got an entire front court that's returning, and Auburn's got a good combination of returners and some freshmen as well. Whereas A&M's like really reliant on this transfer portal class, which I think kind of gives them a bit of an edge.
And Andy, I didn't really think about this when we were talking it through, but legitimately Marcus Hill could from NC State could be the starting 2.
Yeah.
Mgbako at the 3, Griffin at the 3, Mgbako back to the 4, Fed at the 5. And if that's the case, you've got an entire starting 5. Yeah. Which would be crazy stuff there. And, I'm with you, Andy. I think talking about Mgbako, I think his athleticism is going to shine in buckyball, man. Like it goes. And I think maybe there's some people that are going to sleep a little bit on Pop Isaac since he's been out of the picture a little bit for the past injury and stuff. And look, I hear both the Kentucky and Florida arguments in a big way, Andy, and I think we both feel very strongly about how good both of those teams are going to be and how good both of those classes are going to be. And in fact, I very seriously would have to weigh Florida versus Kentucky for second, just because of the top end strength of both Boogie Fland and Xavier Lee, right? Yeah. And the factor of, while Kentucky has all these guys coming in, who of them will be starters? I think that's a big part of the conversation, because as you said, as we were talking pre-show, you've got several guys coming back. Tega Owe is a great example of that. And then you've got some really dynamic freshmen coming in, Jasper Johnson to headline that. And so I think because of what A&M brings in, that will be starters that will really affect what we think is going to be a great team at College Station. And I think buckyball will continue to thrive at the SEC level, Andy. So I feel good about this choice that we've made here.
Yeah, me too. And I think one element of this too that could end up being proven wrong, certainly. But one thing that I love that Mark Pope did last year was Kentucky's class was so many guys who really catered to Mark Pope's style. You know, they bring in like an Amari Williams, who's a great passing big, which is something that Coach Pope loves. And this year's class, I think they have some of those guys, but I also think that and there's nothing wrong with this. They went and got some really talented players, but like Jaden Quaintance was a fit in Calipari's system, but he's not as much of a fit stylistically in Mark Pope's system. Now, do not get me wrong, Big Blue Nation. Jaden Quaintance is incredibly good, and he will be good, but it's not like it didn't fit as well. And Jalen Lowe, I don't know how much his game fits in Mark Pope's system. I think that, again, talent will ultimately win out, but that's what gives me the edge for A&M of like, not only is this a talented class, but from what we've seen of Bucky McMillan's system and the style that he likes to play, a lot of these players really fit. And it reminds me of the offseason that Louisville had with Pat Kelsey and the offseason that Mark Pope had last year, where they had this ability to bring in 8, 10, 12 transfers, and they kind of had the ability to fit them around their system. And I feel like that's what we're seeing here with McMillan and the Aggies.
For example, Jalen Lowe comes in from Pitt. He's not a great three-point shooter, Andy, and Mark Pope offense thrives on dudes that can bomb away. Like, hello, Kobe Bryant, what's up, right? So we'll see. All right, Andy, let's go on to our next Power 5 conference. And I think this one was the biggest no-brainer choice out of all 5 of these conferences. Andy, it's the Big East. Who are we going with?
Yeah, we're going with St. John's. We're going with St. John's.
Crazy.
Right, that's crazy. And again, combination of talent and volume here. Like, UConn's got some great talent coming in. Malachi Smith and Silas Demery is an awesome class, but like it's 2 really good players, and they have a few other smaller transfers. But St. John's has a class of 7, and they're pretty much all going to be, if not immediate contributors, like key pieces for this team. And we are both skeptical of the Ian Jackson point guard experiment. I think that's it's, at this point, I think it'd be unreasonable to not be skeptical of that, because we haven't seen him play point guard, but that is the plan. There is obvious talent for Ian Jackson, but then look at the other guards. I mean, Josan Sanone was a great shooter last year at Arizona State. Osiah Sellers was a 40% shooter at Stanford. Dylan Darling was a 20-point per game scorer at Idaho State. Like, that's a really good backcourt. And then you add 2 rugged, physical, good scoring forwards in Bryce Hopkins from Providence and Dylan Mitchell from Cincy. I know Mitchell's not much of a floor spacer, but he's a tough rebounder and a good mid-range scorer. Hopkins, if he's healthy, can do a little bit of everything. Like, this is a class that I really like, and that I think fits Pitino, and that I think fits the Big East, and that I think is just going to have a lot of success. And it just, like you said, there's some other good classes. I like Creighton's class. I like UConn's class. I like what Providence is doing, but it was not close. St. John's was the clear winner here.
No. And similar to what we said about A&M, obviously Zuby is going to be your starting 5.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I mean, Ian Jackson, Bryce Hopkins, Sanone, Sellers are probably your other 4 starters, with apologies to Dylan Mitchell. Like, Dylan Mitchell as your 6th man? Come on. That's crazy to think about. Also, I'm reminded, And do you remember a couple years ago when was it Dylan Mitchell that literally didn't make a three for Texas? That just popped back into my head.
Mm-hmm.
Good
not
grief.
a floor spacer, that is for sure.
No, not a floor spacer in any way, but boy, is he athletic. And as you said, I think will be a great Pitino basketball player, man. I'm excited to see that at work.
Well, let's move on. Let's talk about the Big Ten, because Michigan has an outstanding front court last year, but they've had to replace all of it. They've lost everybody there, but Dusty May brought in plenty of reinforcements for another run at a Big Ten title. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, folks, there is nothing like the NBA Finals, the intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere that if you can, you got to experience it live. And boy, has this year's matchup delivered in a big way. And folks, if you want in, Gametime makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to tip-off. And with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees at checkout, Gametime is a total game changer. I love that I can see the exact view from my seat before I buy. There's no surprises. And the app makes it super simple. You just 2 taps and you're done. Boom, you got your tickets. And with Gametime's guarantee, you know that you're getting the best deal. If you find a better price in the same row and section, they'll actually credit you 110% of the difference. Folks, Game 5 tonight. On Monday, series is tied at 2 wins apiece. And I kid you not, you can get in for as cheap as $383. That includes fees. You're not going to find a better deal anywhere else. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, Isaac, we talked SEC and Big East in the first segment, looking at the best transfer portal classes in each power conference, as we are now at the point in the offseason where we're pretty much done with transfer portal additions. We'll see some more international additions, some late recruits, but for the most part, the transfer portal is pretty much well and done. And we're going to look at the Big Ten now. And we were just talking about this, Isaac, like outside of the SEC, the Big Ten was one of the more difficult conferences to choose. I think there was 5, 6, 7 potential teams we could have gone with here. Who did we end up choosing and why?
Andy, the team is Michigan. And while our first 2 picks from the SEC and Big East were volume and quality, Michigan is more about the quality and less about the volume, just a 4-player class. But Andy, this is where we really start talking that. I like to talk about this. I'm a big fantasy football player, and anytime I'm doing a trade, I don't care how many players or what's going on. I just want the best dude in the trade, right? Like if it's a 3-for-1 trade, I'm giving you 3 guys, but I'm getting back, whomever happens to be the best player. Awesome. I have won that trade. And I think that is what helps solidify this choice for me. And that's because Michigan brings in Yaxel Lindeborg from UAB. Andy, part of that is, best player in the trade, but also anytime you can get a dude who could legitimately be in this draft that's next week and go probably first round, but decides to come back to school, that's a massive win for Dusty May, right? As you said, going into the break, loses the Twin Towers front court, obviously of Wolf and Golden, but brings in Lindeborg, brings in Merez Johnson from Illinois. I think a lot of people might have missed him because of that hand injury last year at Illinois that caused him to miss a good bit of the year. Ade Mara out on from UCLA, obviously a big dude. UCLA wasn't that great last year, so some folks might not be too aware of him. But you bring in those 3 guys for your front court and bring in Elliot Cadeau from North Carolina, who he's up and down at times, but is one of the best vision point guards, kind of pure point guards in the country when he brings it all together. If he can do that more consistently, and that's a big if, Andy, I recognize that. But if he can, they're going to be cooking in Ann Arbor. Andy, what do you think about this choice? And then as compared to other choices we could have made from the Big Ten?
Yeah, I think you're spot on the Cadeau take of that's the hinge in terms of how great this class is does Cadeau adjust to Michigan's offense successfully. And kind of, I think Michigan's downfall last year was some inconsistency in the backcourt and some excellence in the front court. And like this year's group is going to be excellent in the front court, but like, how does that backcourt adjust? I think that is a big question, but it's really hard to not like, I mean, again, Ademara Morris-Johnson would be a great front court additions in the transfer portal on its own. And to also get Yaxel Lendeberg, who most people thought was going to be in the draft, is a tremendous coup for Coach May and this Wolverines team. But it was tough because, like you said, you want to pick, like, you want the best player. And I think that Yaxel Lendeberg is probably the best player, but it is close. And it is close specifically with Donovan Dent from UCLA. And I think that ultimately I would lean Lendeberg over Dent, although it is very close, but I definitely leave Michigan. I think that the overall class talent coming into Ann Arbor is better than the talent that's joining UCLA. If you consider Lendeberg and Dent a bit of a wash. So it was close. And I mean, I think there's some other, like Washington's getting both Desmond Claude and Wesley Yates. And they have some other good players coming in as well. Like there's some really good classes in the Big Ten. Unsurprisingly, I should say, like, I'm not surprised that this conference is adding so much talent, but I feel good about our Michigan pick.
Yep. Agreed, Andy. I totally agree there. Okay. Let's go to the Big 12, the other named, numberly named conference, although this one with numerals rather than letters. I couldn't think of the word letters, Andy.
Yeah.
That's
it's a tough one. I don't blame you.
Good grief. All right, Andy, Big 12. It's funny because like the Big 12, I think this is the first year, Andy, where I've looked at these hauls for the Big 12 and haven't been as impressed as maybe I was in a few previous years. I think that's a one-off, but I feel like I need to say that up front is like, I'm not as overwhelmed as I have been by the Big 12 in recent years. I think there's some potential BYU conversation here. I think there's some potential Baylor conversation here, Cincinnati, but Andy, is this another best player wins the day situation?
Yeah, I think it is. We're going with Kansas State, Jerome Tang and the Wildcats in Little Manhattan, bringing in PJ Haggerty. And that is, I mean, there's very few, maybe one, because I think the only All-Americans who entered the transfer portal were him and RJ Lewis, and RJ Lewis stayed in the draft. So I think this might be the only All-American transfer portal addition that a team made this last offseason. And obviously we have seen Jerome Tang have tremendous success with kind of diminutive guards, and PJ Haggerty is one of, if not the best small guard in the country. And I think that this is a match that really seems to work. And it was a fun trade where Doug McDaniel goes from Kansas State to Memphis, and then PJ Haggerty goes the other direction. So kind of fun trading of some of those talented smaller guards. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, I think for Kansas State, like, it's mostly about PJ Haggerty. Like that's without PJ Haggerty, this is not even a program that we're considering. But that's not to say that the rest of this class isn't good. Nate Johnson from Akron's a solid player. Abdi Bashir from Monmouth, I think he scored like 20 a game last year. Tyreek Smith comes in, also from Memphis. Kamari McGriff from UNC Wilmington. Like there's some talent joining this program, but without Haggerty, it would just be like another decent transfer portal class for Jerome Tang, but Haggerty really puts it over the edge. And it's a combination of, like I said, not just his talent level, but the fact that this is the kind of player that Jerome Tang has really had success with Marquise Noel and Tyler Perry and others that they've brought in. Those Doug McDaniel, the more recent example. I really think this is going to work well for Jerome Tang.
Andy, let me ask you this. We didn't talk about this, so if you don't have an answer at the ready, it's fine.
I'll make one up. Don't worry.
That's what we do, folks. Take PJ Haggerty out of the equation. What team would you have chosen if PJ Haggerty had not committed to Kansas State?
Yeah, I think I would have gone Cincinnati. I'm pretty intrigued by their class. I think that they have a really good transfer portal class. If you were trying to pick the best defensive transfer portal class, like Braba Miller's a great defensive player. Mustafa Tiam from Central Florida is a great defensive player. They brought in a couple other players who are really good on that end of the floor. I'm not sure.
Harris.
Yeah, Sincere Harris. I knew there was another one that was really a good defender. But like Kirk Kriisa, I'm skeptical, not just coming off the injury, but he's been up and down in his career. I think that could be an addition that works really well for them. But I'm not holding my breath on that one necessarily. But overall, like Baylor's tough because they brought in a ton of talented players, but they had to. They literally lost their entire roster. I will say that I think Mikey Ratai is a player that is not getting nearly enough attention. I think he is tremendously talented and will contend to be an all Big 12 player and a first-round pick next year. I think he is that good. And they got some – Dan Skillings is a good player. They got some other good
Bodo, another double namer.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. So I like Baylor's class. BYU is hard to ignore because of Rob Wright. The rest of their transfer portal class is kind of quiet, and it's the freshmen obviously coming in. But for me, I think Cincy would have been my top choice outside of if Haggerty hadn't gone to Kansas State.
Okay, Andy.
And crazy that we haven't even mentioned Kansas, right? Like that's kind of wild.
How wild is that? And maybe it's a good thing because the transfer portal classes haven't worked out well the last 2 years.
True.
So, good grief. We'll see what happens in Lawrence this year. Andy, Will Wade has brought an absolute haul to Raleigh, North Carolina. But is it the best class in the ACC, or is Pat Kelsey in Louisville going to reign supreme again for a second straight year in this conference? We'll have that answer for you coming up in just a second. Andy, we've got one Power 5 conference left, and then we've also got our non-Power 5 pick we got to get to as well. So I kind of set it up, but I think, with apologies to Miami, Virginia, maybe North Carolina, Louisville and NC State seem to be the top two teams portal-wise this year in the ACC. Which one of those two schools are we going with?
Yeah, this was probably the strongest argument between volume versus quality. Like, I think there's some other conferences where we sort of duked it out, but like with this one, Louisville's got 3 players coming in, but they're excellent. And then NC State's got some really talented players coming in, but they also have a larger volume of talent joining, again, because for necessity, obviously, as that roster had to turn over much more than Louisville's did. But ultimately, we went with Louisville, and it was close. Again, I think coach fit matters here, and that's not to say that the NC State players won't fit Will Wade's system. In fact, I think that they will. But Pat Kelsey loves shooters. He loves his offense is predicated on spacing the floor and launching a bunch of threes. And I don't know if you could have added better players to your roster than Isaac McNeely and Ryan Conwell from Virginia and Xavier, respectively, and then Adrian Woolley from Kennesaw State. Like it's a guard-heavy transfer portal class, literally all guards for Louisville. But this is a class that can shoot it, that can space the floor. Conwell can handle the ball a little bit. Like, this is a really, really good group of players, and I think like it's tough, because I think that's the top heaviness of NC State's class. Like, Darion Williams obviously is such a dynamic player and is probably the best. And it kind of goes a little bit against your fantasy football analogy earlier, where I think Williams is probably the best transfer. But if 2 and 3 for them is what, like, is it Arsenault? Is it Van Allen Lubin? Like, it's a little bit more questionable. Whereas I think that McNeely and Conwell is just such a dynamic top 2. And again, such a good fit for Coach Kelsey's system that it's just hard to deny them here.
Yep, that's where I'm at as well, Andy. Mm-hmm. And I don't want this for us to be any disrespect toward NC State, because good grief, yeah, like what Will Wade's doing already is great there. But just everybody rewind and remind yourselves what Ryan Conwell did at the end of last year. Yeah. It was absolutely insane. And you think Pat Kelsey's not going to let him cook the way Sean Miller? I mean, what are we doing? And Isaac McNeely, oh, by the way, is going to be the overwhelming recipient of that. Don't be fooled by Virginia not being good the last couple of years. He's just going to stand out there and bomb away when Conwell drives and does what I mean, that backcourt with probably Mikael Brown as well. Andy, good grief. You get Case and Pryor back in the mix, hopefully back fully healthy from injury. Javon Hadley, I just, all due respect to NC State and what Will Wade has done, Louisville, this is great.
Yeah, and I think there's a conversation to be had. We've touched on it a little bit when we talked about the new ACC coaches, but like there's some transfer portal significant intrigue. I mean, we just glossed over Miami. They brought in an entire starting lineup on the transfer portal. I think the only non-transfer starter for that team next year will be Shelton Henderson, the top 15 or top 20 recruit. But like they get in Ernest Uday, they get in Malik Renault, they have Trey Donald. Like, this is a really good class for this team, and I'm really excited about what they're going to be able to do. I think North Carolina has done fairly well with their transfer portal class, and Virginia gets Malik Thomas, and Devin Tillis is a really good mid-major player. Like that, there's some really good transfers joining like we talked about the Big 12 transfer class being kind of down, and I think like there's concern of like, is this a larger thing where the SEC and the Big 10 are just going to dominate? And like, maybe. Like, I don't want to pretend we're like that. That's not the reality that it could be coming to, but the ACC's influx of talent in the transfer portal this year kind of makes me feel like maybe that's not, we shouldn't jump to that conclusion, because there's a lot of good players leaving power conferences to go to the ACC this year.
Yeah. Cause this time last year, we were looking at the ACC portal class and we're like, Chucky,
Mm-hmm.
hey, what's up, Chucky? You know,
Yeah.
like, dude, it was just, man, crazy stuff. So good for Louisville bringing this in for 2 years in a row. But all told, as you said, Andy, much better portal haul for the ACC than last year. Andy, we've looked at the Power 5 conferences. One more year before we get the Pac-12 back. We'll see if we re-include them as a Power 6, maybe give it a probation year or two, and then make a call on that. But Andy, as we head into the next year, thinking about all the other, what are we at? 31 conferences, 25-ish other conferences.
25 sounds right. Yeah.
What school's going to win out?
Yeah, we had a tough conversation here. We're kind of looking at a few different schools, but uniquely, almost all schools out on the West Coast. Ended up going with Santa Barbara, which is funny because I feel like Santa Barbara is pretty regularly in this conversation. Like, I know I did a show last year where we talked about some of the best mid-major portal classes, and we talked about Santa Barbara, and unfortunately, they haven't really translated their ability to bring in. They have a good amount of money. They have good NIL funds that they can use, and it haven't really translated to success on the court. And so we'll see. Like last year, there was 2 great schools in the Big West, and Santa Barbara was not one of them, even though they had a good class. But this year, they bring in 2 really talented guards. Miro Little comes over from Utah. He was a highly regarded prospect when he started his career at Baylor. Didn't really get off the floor much at Baylor, but was better at Utah last year. Now he goes to Santa Barbara. And then their big one is Aiden Mahaney, and obviously Aiden Mahaney is a name most folks will know. 2 great years at St. Mary's, spent last year at UConn, and it didn't go well. I mean, I think that's a pretty non-controversial statement. Mahaney was unable to really stay on the floor. His defense suffered in UConn's system, and he ended up hitting the portal again, and now he ends up at Santa Barbara. And I think this is a fit for him where he's going to kind of get to let go a little bit and play more stylistically similar to what he did at St. Mary's, but in a faster-paced offense. And I think that might really work for him. So I know Santa Barbara, like we went mid-major, like we could have just been like, oh, Gonzaga added Tyne Grant Foster and Adam Miller. Like, that's the one. Or we could have gone with Memphis and their transfer portal class. And it's like, like I kind of wanted to honor like a more mid-major team, if that makes sense.
Yes,
and I thought we had a couple other, we talked UNLV a little bit, and with Josh Pastner coming in, and San Francisco has a really good transfer portal class that I think deserves some love as well. But I'm glad we're going with the Gauchos here.
Yeah, that's a good word. Plus, anytime we get to say Gauchos on the show, we win. But Andy, I think, if we were doing like a top 5 outside the power conference structure, it would probably be some form of Memphis, Gonzaga, UNLV, San Francisco, and Santa Barbara. Like, those probably legitimately are the 5 we would go with there. And so I'm very curious to see how that all comes together. Andy, that's a fun show, man. Folks, we'd love to hear where you think we've gone horribly awry, but where you would agree as well, and individual players we missed, all of that kind of stuff. Let us know. We'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, so many different teams that could be talked about here, obviously, but we had a lot of fun taking a shot at talking about this, and who knows, maybe there'll be enough movement that we'll do something similar to this again. We'll look at some of those other teams, because I think there's a lot of fun to be had when talking about some of these transfer portal classes. But folks, that is going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Hope you guys are off to a fantastic start with your week. We'll be back with more shows throughout the week. We'll keep you up to date on what's going on with the NBA draft as we get closer and closer to that. Any more transfer portal stuff, recruiting as we get kind of into the summer circuit and things of that nature as well. So lots of fun stuff still to be had here on Locked On College Hoops. But again, folks, thanks again for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Join us on the Discord channel, Locked On College Basketball, if you have not done so yet. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family, even though Purdue was not going to be in this conversation.
They don't need to be. They don't need to be.
Oscar Clough is great, but they don't need to be in this conversation. Let's go Wild Popes. We did talk about them. Cheers to the McBruins and Donovan Dent. And until Tuesday, peace out.